What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be working on the carburetor tune on the D100. So the entire time that I've owned this truck, that carburetor has always run pretty rich. So a while back, while the engine was still at the machine shop, I did a full rebuild on that Edelbrock carburetor, and it needed it. It was bad. I mean, there was all kinds of like caramelized fuel in there. It was like a layer of like shellac. It was bad. So tore it all apart, did a full rebuild on it, hoping that would help once I got the engine back, and hopefully that would have helped the fuel mixture issue. It didn't. So, like I said, today I'm gonna see if I can get this thing dialed in. But before I even turn the truck on, there are a few things that I want to check first. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the top of the carburetor so that I can check the floats. I want to make sure the floats are adjusted correctly. When I'm working on parts like this, I like to work in one of these metal, this is an aluminum, I think, cooking pan. It does a couple of things for me. First, it helps contain any fluids and basically just contains everything into the pan, keeps it from getting all over my workbench and make my workbench dirty. Not that my workbench is clean, but it helps. The second thing it does is it contains all my small parts, like my needle and springs here. I don't have to worry about knocking them off my workbench onto the floor or behind the workbench or anything like that. It just helps contain small parts. If I drop a screw, it's going to land in the pan and not roll onto the floor into the abyss. So that's just a little tip. So your floats, not only do they adjust the level of fuel in the carburetor, basically open and closing the valve, letting the fuel in or telling the fuel to stop, that fuel level actually has a lot to do with how well the carburetor runs, whether it be running rich or running lean. If your floats sit too high in the bowl, it allows too much fuel in there, and the weight of that extra fuel can actually leak into the carburetor and into your intake prematurely through like your secondaries. So if your floats are too high, it's too much fuel, and that fuel weight can actually cause a rich condition by leaking into the carburetor and intake early. So a quick way to check your float level is to use a drill bit. Use a 7/16 drill bit, and what you want to do, and you got to make sure your gasket's in place. So what you want to do is you just take the shank, or the away from up here so it's more accurate, take the bottom part of the drill bit here, and you want to just kind of start to roll it under your float. And ideally you would make it about halfway under, about halfway the drill bit under the float before it touches. So that is not. I don't know how well that showed up. Let me see if I can show that better. So there's that rod's in the way, but see that? That float is too high. It's touching that drill bit too soon. And I'll almost guarantee the other one, and the other one's actually even worse. So my floats are obviously floating too high, allowing too much fuel into the bowl. So you need to adjust the floats. To adjust your floats, it's really just a trial and error thing. You have to bend your float right here at the base of the float and the piece that goes up to the hinge here. This is what you want to bend, and by adjusting that, it's going to adjust where this sits in relation to the height. So you don't want to do it with it in the carburetor, so I'm going to pop the pin out here, and then I'm going to adjust this so it actually sits a little bit higher. Your float comes out. Now I want it to sit higher, so I'm going to just take a pair of pliers. I like these because they have a nice straight edge. You know, a lot of pliers are tapered. So I like to use these though, just because it's a straighter edge. I don't know, maybe it's just me. And then I'm going to bend this just a bit. And put it back in, and we'll double, and then we'll check that level again with the drill bit. If I can get the pin to line up. Now I got the float back in. I can recheck using my drill bit. So it's not quite there yet. So you just make little adjustments at a time. This is just brass, so you don't want to go crazy with it. That I think may have been too much, but put it in and check it. Seems like if you actually feel it move, then it easily becomes too much of an adjustment. Yep. It's hitting right there. Actually, looking at the shape of the bowl here, and using the drill bit, difficult to do this, show it on camera well. If you look at where it actually, because of the curve on the bottom, that's actually like a perfect, I'm good with that one. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. So the next measurement that you want to take is the drop of the float. And that basically is this right here. So just how far that drops down. So using one of these paper tape measures that come with pretty much every rebuild kit, they're good to hang on to. If you want to measure with the gasket in place how far that drops down. So with this top edge where this curve is, that should be 15/16 down from the gasket. And this one is just about there. And this one is right there, right at 15/16. Now, if you had to adjust that, again, you want to take the float out and you adjust that drop by bending this tab here on the back of the float. So while adjusting your floats can be, a bit of a tedious process, it is necessary for proper tuning of your carburetor. I decided obviously to have it be the first thing that I wanted to do, since I had to open the carburetor to get it done. Pretty much everything else should be done outside the carburetor. So a good first step. So the next adjustment I'm going to make is to the electric choke. And all the choke does is, or the electric choke, is keep your choke closed longer or shorter based on where this is set. So if you have it set more to the rich side, it's going to keep your choke closed longer and help the engine heat up more before your choke begins to open. If you set it to the lean side, there's less tension on the choke. It'll warm up, or it'll open sooner. It won't be as warm, but it'll open sooner. So when I had taken all this apart and put it back together, I just left it set at where the previous owner had, which was just a hair on the rich side. I think I'm just going to set it to center and go from there. We'll see how that does. Now, mind you, that's only obviously for first startup and idle until the engine warms up. It's not going to help my rich condition driving, but it'll help in the beginning. So I've got it set where I want. I'm just going to retighten down the outside screws. So the next adjustment I'm going to make is to the fuel pressure. So no matter if you're running an electric pump like I am, or if you're running the mechanical engine-driven pump, you really want to have a pressure regulator. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, you know, an engine-driven pump is already set to be a good pressure for a carburetor. Yeah, well, car went by. So is my electric pump. I think my electric pump is set for like 9 PSI, which is technically good for a carburetor. It's high, but it would work. Same with your mechanical pumps. You know, when it comes to those things, whether it be quality control and production or parts, you know, whatever, even though, yes, they're going to be a good pressure for a carburetor, they might not be the right pressure for your carburetor. So, like this version of Edelbrock Carb likes to be at like 5.5 PSI. I think I actually have mine set for 6. So I'm going to turn the ignition on, my fuel pump will kick on, and I'm going to adjust my fuel pressure regulator. And then obviously once I do start the truck, I will double check it with the engine running. All right, so I've got the truck on, the ignition's on, which kicks on the fuel pump. And you can see there I'm sitting at about 6.5 PSI. So that is high. So in order to adjust the fuel pressure on one of these Holley fuel pressure regulators, you loosen the lock nut on top, and then back out this screw with an Allen wrench, and that'll bring the pressure down. And there, jump down to just over 5.5. So right there, it's between 5 and 5.5 PSI. Run the lock screw back down. Use an Allen wrench to help hold that in place and tighten down the lock nut. Now I'm set to 5.5-ish, maybe a little bit lower, but I'm good with that. So now we'll move on to the next step. So the next step should be to fire up the truck, let it warm up, and then adjust the idle air screws. But I'm going to pull mine out, give them a good cleaning, and probably just spray some carb cleaner down inside the orifices just to be safe. So your idle air screws are these two right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull them out. Like I said, give everything a good cleaning and spray some carb cleaner down inside there. With everything cleaned up and back together, I've got the idle mixture screws all the way in. Now they're not tight, they're just down to the point where you feel it gets snug. I'm going to back them each out, one full turn. And that should give me just a good starting point. People say 1.5, 2 turns. I'm just going to set it to 1 since I'm going to be adjusting everything with a vacuum gauge. So with everything put back together, buttoned up, and cleaned up, this thing is ready to start and get warmed up, and then I'm going to adjust the idle air mixture screws by using a vacuum gauge. All right, so I got the truck running, it's up to temp. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a vacuum gauge hanging up right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the idle mixture screws one at a time. I'm going to start backing it out until I get to the highest reading on the vacuum gauge. And then I'll do the same for the other screw. And I'll put the camera on the vacuum gauge so you can just see the adjustment. All right, so right now you can see I'm sitting at about between 13 and 15 inches of vacuum. So I'm going to start with the driver's side idle mixture screw. I'm going to back that out until I get the best reading on the vacuum gauge here. I started at 1 complete turn out. That's 1.5. There's 2. About 16 the normal motor. I may be able to maybe play with the timing a little bit. You know, there are several things that could be causing the low range, the low normal range vacuum. The first, obviously, the carburetor. Like I said, I did rebuild it. It was bad in there. There may still be issues with it. I don't know the history of that carburetor. So that could definitely be a possibility. It may not just be running as efficiently as it should. The second, my cam. I am running a larger cam, and that could definitely reduce the amount of vacuum. So, but being at 16 inches of vacuum, which is right in the low range of normal, I'm fine with that. It's more than enough to run my brakes and to run that switch that triggers, or that supplies power to the overdrive circuit in the 46RH transmission, which, if you haven't watched any of the videos where I took out the TorqueFlite 904 and installed the 46RH, I'll link to that first video up here. You can go back and watch those videos. So thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll catch you on the next one.